My name is Chloe Knapp, and I have been eating a whole food plant-based diet for about 8 months. My journey started back in high school. My senior year, I was in choir, and there was this one week during choir where I kept having these episodes of passing out and fainting. That's something that had never really happened before, and the doctors kind of just brushed it off and thought, I'm just a teenager, I'll grow out of it, and it wasn't a big deal. And after a week, I eventually didn't have any more issues and I was back to my normal healthy self. I was healthy until about my second month of my freshman year of college. I was just getting the hang of classes and extracurricular activities, and again, I was in a bunch of choirs, and I started to have episodes of fainting. I would get really dizzy and lightheaded, and I could feel my heart pounding and my blood pressure dropping, and I would pass out. Oftentimes I would be exerting myself like I had just walked, or I was singing in choir, standing up in church, and I would pass out. And I ended up in the emergency room several times. The doctors didn't really think much of it. Some of the physicians thought maybe it was due to low sodium or that I was just dehydrated. And again, they kind of brushed it off, just saying I was a college student, and if I ate right and drank enough water, then I would probably grow out of it. However, these episodes of passing out kept happening, and they became more frequent, and I kept going to the emergency room. And finally, one of the last times I went to the emergency room, they decided to admit me as an inpatient to do further testing, and I ended up staying in the hospital for about 5 days. And I saw about every specialist there. And eventually on the 5th day, I was seen by a cardiologist. The cardiologist diagnosed me with POTS, or Postural Orthostatic Tachycardia syndrome, which sounds like a mouthful, but essentially it means I have a hard time with positional changes. So when I go from a lying to a sitting, or a sitting to a standing position, I get dizzy and can pass out. This is most common in teenagers and young adults, and most common in females actually. And he gave me a new medication to try and some different lifestyle changes to make. He advised me to start taking a water retention pill, and he had me drink a lot of water and tons of Gatorade and eat a lot of salt. I did all of these, and within a couple months I was completely back to my normal self. I was able to go to class. I was able to exercise and do everything I wanted to again. In April of 2017, I was at work, and all of a sudden I had all of my symptoms come back. I was really dizzy and really lightheaded, and I could feel my heart rate pounding, and it felt like my blood pressure was dropping, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I wasn't sure why it was happening now, and it was really random, and I hadn't changed anything in my life. I hadn't started an exercise program or changed jobs or anything. So I was sent to the emergency room. Again, they just kind of brushed it off because I had had that diagnosis of POTS, and they gave me some saline, and I started to feel better. And I figured by the next morning I would feel completely fine, and it was just a fluke. And as long as I did my regimen of drinking water and Gatorade and eating lots of salt, I would be okay. I actually had added symptoms this time. I remember the night that I didn't feel well, my husband had brought me a Whitey's ice cream shake, which was one of my favorite foods at the time, and my stomach was so upset that I can only eat a couple bites of it. So the next morning I still didn't feel great, and I figured maybe it's just going to take some time to recover and get back on my feet. And like a month went by, and I still wasn't feeling better, and I still wasn't able to eat much. I was constantly nauseous all the time, and I had a hard time even walking down the street or walking around my house. Eventually I went back to the cardiologist who had originally diagnosed me. He tried me on a medication again, but I wasn't able to tolerate it. I did all of the suggestions he had recommended. I had started to slowly do some strength training exercises to build up my endurance, and none of it was really helping. Eventually I started doing IV saline infusions about 3 times a week. And while those would help, it would only help for a couple of hours. And so I saw my general practitioner and my cardiologist several times, and I still wasn't getting better, and months had gone by. And eventually that summer, I went to Iowa City and saw a cardiologist there. And I had really high hopes walking into that clinic, but when I saw him, he didn't really do a physical exam or anything. He just kind of walked in the room and stated that I should eat more salt and drink more water. And it was a huge letdown because I had a lot of hope in this doctor, thinking that maybe he would come up with a way to help me feel better and get my life back. But again, he had just recommended what I had been trying for months. I left Iowa City disappointed, and I went back home, and I didn't really know what else to do. And that summer, I still had a lot of issues. My husband was actually able to get me a consult at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He got me a consult with Dr. Lowe, a neurologist who actually coined the term postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And so he's about one of the top POTS doctors you can see in the United States. That appointment wasn't until October, so I had a few months before then, and I just really wasn't feeling well. I had a lot of times where I couldn't go to work, I couldn't really leave the house, and I was actually hospitalized a couple of times. I started to develop these convulsions, and a lot of the physicians would tell me that I was faking my symptoms or that I should go see a psychiatrist, and it was just very frustrating. I was just kind of holding on for that appointment at the Mayo Clinic, and a month later we left for Rochester, Minnesota. I stayed there for a week. I wasn't an inpatient, but they scheduled tests all day long for you as an outpatient, and so we were there for about 5 days. And each day I had this long schedule of testing and education. They essentially came to the conclusion that they agreed with my diagnosis of POTS. Dr. Lowe was able to give me a lot of information about it and some other things to try. I saw a physiologist who kind of explained what happens in my body when I have an episode or why I don't feel well. And I went to an information session on how to live with POTS and go through your daily life with it. And then he advised me to try this different medication. I went on propranolol, which is a beta blocker, to help lower my heart rate. He had me try this specific exercise regimen, and then he had me drink boluses of water every single day. So instead of sipping on water, I would chug about 16 ounces of water 4 times a day. And so I went home and I tried these things, and they did help with my symptoms some, but I still was not able to get back to my old self, and I still didn't feel healthy, and I wasn't able to run, and I wasn't able to exercise as much as I wanted, and I wasn't able to work full time. And it was just very frustrating because I felt like I had exhausted all of my resources, and there wasn't really any other doctors I could see. There wasn't anything else anyone could suggest for me. And so I kind of felt hopeless. And Thanksgiving came around, and I was at my family Thanksgiving meal, and I had this really big Thanksgiving dinner, and I was really full, and immediately after I'd eaten all that food, I felt really sick and really dizzy and really awful. And I thought to myself that maybe food did have to do with it, because I felt so awful immediately after I ate, and I've been having a lot of symptoms like nausea and weight loss. That night I Googled what to eat when you have POTS. The only thing I could find on the internet that was scientific research was to eat more salt, to eat smaller meals, and to drink lots of fluid, which I have been doing for months. Then I came across this girl on YouTube who also has POTS and said that she had like 20 some symptoms, and she cured almost all of them by eating essentially a whole food plant-based diet. She cut out meat and dairy and processed foods, and she felt so much better. Although there was no scientific research to back it up, I thought I would try it anyways because I didn't really have much to lose. And so overnight I decided to start eating a whole food plant-based diet, and I kind of went into my kitchen looking around to see what I could eat because it was filled with meat and dairy and processed food. And the next morning I ate oatmeal for breakfast, and from then on I haven't had any meat or dairy or anything like that since. Within the first week I noticed drastic changes. So one of the symptoms that went along with my POTS was extreme fatigue, and no matter how much sleep I got, I had a horrible time with being tired and fatigued all the time. And I always felt like I had to have a nap every single day. And I remember sitting at work and feeling wide awake and like I had so much energy. I felt like I had drinking 4 cups of coffee when I hadn't had any coffee for a long time. And it was just a great feeling to be able to feel awake and alive during the day and not like I need a nap every single hour. The next thing I noticed was that I had a lot less nausea. I went from eating just a couple hundred calories to 1 full meal a day to 2 full meals and eventually to 3 full meals a day. That really allowed my body to heal itself to get enough nutrition and enough calories and enough food. I started to feel better and better every single week, and I was able to tolerate positional changes better. I wouldn't black out as much when I stood up, and I didn't have as drastic of heart rate and blood pressure changes. I stopped having fainting episodes. I went from just doing stationary exercises like on the floor, the recumbent bike, to being able to start walking down the street and taking long walks, and then eventually to running. This past April, I was able to train for and run a 5K race. I ran the Gilda's Run for Laughs, and I ran it in 26 minutes and 38 seconds, which was a second place time in my age group, and finishing that race was one of the happiest and most emotional times in my life because it made me realize how far I had come and how I was able to heal myself eating a whole food plant-based diet. I'm about 95% back to my normal self, and I'm able to work as much as I need to. I'm able to exercise, I'm able to hang out with friends and have a social life, and essentially I'm able to be a normal 24-year-old. This coming fall, I'll be starting graduate school to become a physician assistant, and it's a very rigorous academic program and something I would never be able to do if I hadn't started eating a whole food plant-based diet. I'm very thankful that I came across that video and was able to read books and watch documentaries and learn about this way of life and this way of eating, because it has significantly changed my life and it has given me my quality of life back.